Shalom. Kahala Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakah Kodash, double honors to my apostles and elders, a great millstone. Shalom to my brothers teaching this word. This is Baruch, chapter 2, verse 30. For I know that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves. And this is talking about the Israelites, our people, so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, and our people that are scattered abroad. As a nation, we're hard-headed. We're stiff-necked people, man. We disobeyed the law. We disobeyed Yahweh Shemashai, the Lord. The scripture mentions that all Israel has transgressed thy law, and ultimately we pissed off the Lord. And that's why we're in the land of our captivities, But the Lord said in the scriptures that we're going to remember ourselves. And that's a cut to those small hats. They didn't even go into captivity. They're in rulership. They rule the society, proving that they are the biblical Edomites. Because in fact, they're the top, of the biblical Edomites. They're the top tribe, which is Amelek. They run this world. And we know that Esau is the end of this world. Esau is the end of the world, meaning age. They run this age. This is their rulership. This is their, heaven. And ultimately, they stole, our heritage. They stole our heritage, and ultimately they committed that identity theft. That's what Esau does. Esau takes people's stuff. How much more the people of the Lord? Now you got Esau running around calling himself a Jew. Those small hats, when they're really nothing but Edomite imposters. Because they're really, Amalekites. Because if you go back into the history, the Khazars, are ultimately converted into, the customs of Israelites. But guess what? Esau's corrupt. Esau's profane. So Esau added in bullshit. That's why you get the Talmud and all kind of nonsense that they do. But ultimately, them Khazars ultimately were Edomites, around Turkey area. They were Edomite Amalekites, and ultimately that's how they became, so-called Jews today, because at the end of the day, they're just Edomites, and when you tell a lie for so long, people begin to believe it, so these Edomites have been, through generations on generation, they've been, living off lies, they've inherited lies, the same way our people inherited lies too, our people think they're black, think they're Native American, think they're Mexican, when you're really not, you're really a child of Israel, you're really an Israelite, and we're in the land of captivity, and our enemy, our top enemy, is pretending to be us, but the beautiful thing is, according to the Lord's prophecies, is that the real Israelites in the land of their captivity are going to remember themselves. Are the small hats doing that? No. And that shows you that they're imposters. They have no part, of Jacob. They don't fit the prophecies of Jacob. They don't, match. The math ain't mathing with them. But guess who matches the prophecy of the Israelites in these last days? And that's the Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans. Did not, the Southern Kingdom go into slavery on ships. And you had, sprinkles of the Northern Kingdom that went into ships as well, that was taken into Spain, But especially the transatlantic slave trade, that was heavily the Southern Kingdom that, went into Egypt again in ships. And we know that Egypt is America. When has the small hats, gone through that? In fact, they're the ones that funded it, because they're the top, tribe of the nation of Edom, because they're really Edomites, and they've, been impersonating us for so long, and that's why the whole world, thinks that they're, Israel, or think that they're Jews when they're really not, and while these devils have been claiming our nationality and have taken upon themselves the heritage of Jacob, they've ruined our reputation, you go around people, even in these other heathen nations, especially them Arabs, which are really Ishmaelites. If you mention to them that you're an Israelite, they're going to think that you're talking about those small hats, because those small hats, they tarnished, the name of Israel, and they're not really Israelites, and that's what Esau does. Everywhere Esau goes, he takes people's stuff, you know. He will claim to be the people of that land because Esau, Edom, at the end of the day, he's a fugitive, you know. They'll take anything, you know. It mentions in the book of Obadiah, man. If grape grabbers, gads, wouldn't they leave some grapes, But not this devil, man. This devil, he wants it all, you know. And the only thing he don't want to be is what he really is, an Edomite, But the beautiful thing is, in the last days that we're in right now, the Lord is going to wake up a remnant of the true Israelites, and they're going to remember themselves. They're going to remember who they are. They're going to remember who their power is. This is going to be, like scripture mentions, that the rest have all Israel, and let me get that scripture, I haven't read that scripture for time. Don't want to butcher it. I think it says election. So bear with me. Yeah, I found it. This is Romans 11 verse 7. What then? Israel have not obtained that which is seeking for. This is really talking about the real Israelites, But the election have obtained it, which is the remnant, which we hope that we're part of. And the rest were blinded, which is the rest of our people. The 2/3 of the rebellious Israelites were blinded from this truth, And ultimately the elect is going to obtain it, And that's that's going to be the ones of the Israelites that are going to remember themselves in the land of their captivity, man, in this great awakening, And ultimately, scripture mentions many are called and few are chosen, but the ones that matter right now is the elect of Israel, that are going to remember themselves and call upon Yahweh Shai, and ultimately going to be delivered by Yahweh Shai and taken back into the land by Yahweh Shai, fulfilling the real scripture, fulfilling the scripture of the real Israelites, being brought back to the land via the Messiah, whose real name is Yahweh Shai. Our people are going to fulfill that, the elect of our people, I should say, those small hats, that 1948, that wasn't a fulfillment of the Israelites going back into the land of Israel. First of all, where is the Messiah? Where is King David? The whole thing was a BS. It was a hoax. It was what do you call it? It was like similar to the moon landing. Like Esau just chatting shit. Since Esau's been in rulership, he's just been chatting shit. The dinosaurs were 1,000,000 years old and all that crap. Esau's just a liar, man. The scripture mentions our enemies are gonna be found liars. And them small hats are big time liars, man. They ain't the people of the Lord, and they will never was, and they're never gonna be. You got people really thinking that they're the people of the Lord, man. But very soon the whole world is gonna know who the people of the Lord are, man. Right now the people of the Lord are hidden, because ultimately the nations have come together to consult against the real Israelites, which is us Negroes acting as Native Americans, and we're really the hidden ones, and we fit the prophecies and the curses of the biblical Israelites, because the Edomites are not under these curses. They're going to be under the curses, when Yahweh Shai returns, but they're not under the curses. We Israelites are under the curses. That's a sign, of who we are. That's how we know that we're the Israelites, is that we fit the curses and also the prophecies concerning Jacob, and that we're clearly in our captivity, and we're literally remembering ourselves. This is not of, man. This is from Yahweh Shai. This great awakening is a miracle. Esau, paid trillions of dollars to hide our nationality and these nations as well. They consulted Psalms 83 to hide our nationality, man, to hide who we were, who we are. But guess what? Through divine intervention, through Yahweh Shemashai, we're remembering ourselves in these last days, man. And it says here, and shall know that I am the Lord their power. So we're going to know Yahweh Shemashai. For I will give them a heart and the ears to hear, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity and think upon my name. And that shows you we have the name of Yahweh Shemashai. Are we not doing that? The small hats are not doing that. First of all, not in the land of their captivity. They run everything. They're the top dogs on the earth right now because, they're the head tribe of Edom, and Edom's in rulership. The earth has been given into the hand of the wicked. Esau's the perfect devil, man. He's a perfect villain. And as the perfect villain, of course, he's gonna do identity theft. Esau's the ultimate thief, man. The thief cometh not but to steal, to kill, and destroy. That ultimately, Esau's whole his whole makeup. Esau's a top thief, man. And their dirty hands have took, our name. They placed upon themselves our identity. But in these last days, the elect are gonna normally the Lord, is gonna have the Israelites wake up, particularly the elect, because not every Israelite that wakes up that knows that the Israelite is part of the elect. Because at the end of the day, many are called, a few are chosen. So the ones that really matter on this side, is really the elect of Israel. Because we understand that the Most High's care is for the elect. And that's who's gonna be delivered. Only the elect of Israel. The Lord willing would be part of that. But we are clearly the Israelites. We are clearly fulfilling the scriptures of the biblical Israelites in these last days. How we're going to be in the land of our captivity, and how we're going to be praising our power, Yahweh Shemashai, and remembering ourselves, remembering our heritage. These small hats don't fit none of that. And 1948, is a huge scam. And Esau's lies, they're about to be put to bed, man. They're being put to bed right now by the men of Yahweh Shemashai out there in the highways and the byways, because the Lord said he's going to make Esau bear. And the Lord is doing that through his prophets. And the Lord is also having Esau expose himself. These insiders exposing, and ultimately the Lord, Yahweh Shemashai, even said, it said in the scripture that their tongues are going to, fall upon themselves. So the Lord is having them expose themselves. But ultimately they're being exposed through the prophets of Yahweh Shemashai. And as we're getting closer and closer to the returning of Yahweh Shai, Esau ultimately going to take off the mask, because at the end of the day, Esau is not no Christian, he's not no Jew, he's just a damn Edomite, and he takes anything that he could, benefit from. He took the costume of Christianity so he can benefit from, taking stuff, coveting, while pretending to be the good guy. That's what the villain does. This is the Yahweh Shemashai in his movie made the perfect villain, man. And this villain Esau, stole our identity, and it hurts, because, when people think about the Israelites, they think about those small hats, these carnal people, these people of the world. When you tell them that we're Israelites, they always got the small hat in their mind, and that shows you that Esau, has been lying for so long, has been, chatting shit for so long, but the time of them lying is almost coming to an end, and that's going to fully end when Yahweh Shai returns, because everyone's going to know who the real people of the Lord are, because the heathen are going to see the salvation of the elect, and they're going to see Yahweh Shai return. The jig is up now, man. All your lies, Esau, all your BS, is coming to an end, man. The Lord's people have woken up, man, through divine intervention from Yahweh Shemashai. And what really matters is the elect, have woken up, because we understand the vast majority of our people are not going to make it on this side. They're going to be alright in the kingdom. But on this side, a lot of our people are slated for judgment, So the elect are the only ones that are going to be victorious in Yahweh Shai on this side, man, And Let me get a scripture. Another scripture showing you that we're going to be, known as Israelites again. Salakia. Is it Hosea 10? Bear with me. Yeah, this is Hosea 1 and 10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. Meaning that we're innumerable. Jake is like a huge nation, nation among nations. The scripture mentioned that we're a company of nations. That's how big we grew, because we're a fruitful people, man. You got Jake everywhere, man. You got, if you look at, you got Mexico, which is the tribe of Issachar. You got Brazil, from Colombia to Brazil, the tribe of Asher. From Argentina to Chile, the tribe of Naphtali. You got Ephraim. Ephraim is very fruitful. You got Judah. You got Benjamin. Benjamin is very fruitful too. All our people are fruitful, man. So as we're getting more oppressed, Jake bring out more babies, man. So our population growth is huge, man. We're like the sand of the sea. You can't count every single Israelite. You're not meant to do that anyway, but we're innumerable, man. That's why when the scripture said, in his seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed, that's talking about Israel. Because we're so big, we're likened onto so many, we're nations, man. We're likened onto, that's how big our people grew, as well as Israelites that are scattered as well. There's a lot of Israelites, man. And that's why the elect, if you're part of the Lord's elect, that's an immense blessing, man. Being an Israelite is a blessing in itself. But if you're part of the elect, man, because because our people are innumerable, man. Being of the elect ain't no, light thing, man. That's highly favored, man, by Yahweh Shemashai. Lord willing, we're part of that. But as a nation, we're very favored by the Lord. So we're innumerable, man. We're very fruitful. Esau, Edom's not fruitful. Those small hats are not fruitful. They're not as the sand of the sea. And that's another cut showing that they're not the Israelites. And it shall come to pass in that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, and that's the place of our captivity. Like we read in the book of Baruch, that we're going to be in the land of our captivity. That's where we're not being called the people of the Lord. Because these devils stole our heritage, man, and have lied to us and have destroyed our people, and have called us, and gave us, negative connotations as our nationality, like black, some stupid ass color, because the Most High never called people color. He never, called nations of people, a crayon box. No, the Most High, set up patriarchs, for the different nations on this earth, and there's only 18 nations on this earth. You have 18 patriarchs that the Most High set up, and every person on this earth goes back to one of those 18 men that the Lord set up as nations. And we Israelites, Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, we go back to Jacob. Those small hats, because you're going to have Jake scattered among every nation, even among those gutter rats. You're going to have, Jake scattered among them. But those, small hats as a whole, they're from the nation of Edom, man, which is the so-called white race. As a whole, a nation of Edom. And the small hats are like just as Judah is the head tribe of our nation, the so-called Negroes. On the other side of Esau, their head tribe is Amelek. Those small hats, this JOOs, they're the head of the nation of Edom. So they are really Edomites. They don't come from the patriarch Jacob. They're Edomites, impostors, pretending to be the seed of Jacob, but they're not. While the real seed of Jacob are not being recognized as the seed of Jacob, are being called black, Native American, Latino, all kind of derogatory terms that they call our people, which is not really our nationality. West Indies and all that. No, really, we're the children of Israel. So in this place, we're not being known as the children of Israel, but Yahweh Shemashai has woken us up. We're remembering ourselves and remembering that we're the Israelites. But very soon when Yahweh Shai comes, this is going to happen. When deliverance comes, in the place that we were said we weren't the Lord's people, then shall it be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living power, because Yahweh Shai, who is the ultimate son of the living power, when he returns, he's going to deliver the elect, throughout the whole world, particularly in America, because that's where the bulk of the elect are, because that's where the major destruction is going to take place via the nuclear destruction, the nuclear missiles, and also Yahweh Shai and the angels, vaporizing via the laser beams from the chariots, so there's going to be a huge destruction over there. And also the earth is going to be, getting hit by missiles too from different countries, because it's going to be an all-out nuclear war in this third world war. But the scriptures mention, particularly that America and also the land of Israel, but America is where it's going to be completely desolated and not built back up, and that's where the major hub of destruction is going to be, in the land of the north, where all the 12 tribes of Israel, are in captivity, where all, from Judah, to Ephraim are pressed together. That's where the bulk of the elect are, even though the elect are throughout the whole world, but the vast majority of the elect, the Most High Yahweh has situated them in America, so that when that deliverance comes, it's going to be spectacular, and they're also going to be elect. They're going to get delivered throughout the whole world, because Yahweh Shai is going to dispatch the angels to gather his elect from the four corners of the earth, the elect of Israel. And the nations are going to see the salvation of the elect, and they're going to realize that, that Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, this whole time, have been the Israelites, because the average everyday nation or heathen, they don't know that we're Israelites. Even if we tell them that, they will look at you like you have three heads, or they think that you're in league with those small hats, because they've been taught lies too. Remember, only the elites of these nations, they know who we really are, but the average common, heathen, they don't know who we are, but they're gonna find out, when Yahweh Shai returns. Right now they don't respect us, through power comes respect, and ultimately the heathen are going into slavery, because they violated, and ultimately that's their role, to be servants under Israel, and also they're gonna get punished, because the heathens have violated the Israelites, especially the number one heathen, the Edomites, and everyone's gonna find out that these Edomites, they're the biggest liars ever, man, because when Yahweh Shai turns up, all of Edom lies are gonna be melted, because right now, because where the Lord Yahweh Shai, brought forth his prophets, and his prophets are all going to be rejected, are all going to be despised, are not going to be taken serious. But when Yahweh Shai returns, that's when everyone's going to realize and take it serious that we are the people of the Lord, because the elect are going to be delivered, and Yahweh Shai is going to be here, and he's going to be a so-called black man, which is really a Judah, and everyone's going to find out, man. It ain't going to be no joke, man, in that day. It ain't going to be no more, no more mocking, like these other nations, they love to mock us, and we're never ever going to have that, that stain of being black again, and we hate that term, man, because that's a evil term that Esau put upon our people, specifically the Southern Kingdom, man, because being called black, is basically Esau, saying that, we're void of light, we're dark, when Esau's really the black, he's really, the term black is really fitting on Esau, but Esau projects that on Jake, man. Now our people think they're really black when they're not really not, man. You're a child of Israel, man. You're an Israelite, and it's not just only so-called blacks that are Israelite, but Latinos and Native Americans as well as our people that sky, and only the elect matter on this side, and very soon, we're gonna have our, prestige back, man. We're gonna have our respect back. First of all, the Lord gets his respect first, and ultimately, the Lord's people are gonna be respected again. Right now, those small hats, have tarnished the name of Israel, because they're already imposters, running around with our our name, our forefathers' name, you know. But Yahweh Shai is gonna send Yahweh Shai, and ultimately they're gonna be, you know, known as what they really are, you know, freaking Edomites, man, you know, from the tribe of Amelek, devils, man, you know, and we're gonna be known who we really are, you know, the royalty, you know, the sons of Israel, the sons of the Most High, you know, the people of Israel, man, the children of Yahweh Shai, you know, and the elect are gonna get, you know, that prestige, man, and ultimately it's gonna trickle down to the rest of our people in the kingdom, you know, because only the elect are gonna be delivered, you know, when Yahweh Shai returns. So yeah, I just wanted to go into, you know, like right now we're not considered as, you know, the biblical Israelites, but to hell with what these people consider, what these people validate, you know, these people are walking in gross darkness anyway. You know, what matters is, you know, we got the truth. You know, we know that we are the Israelites. You know, we just gotta hold fast till he comes, man. Because when Yahweh Shai comes, you know, there ain't gonna be no more, you know, debating. There ain't gonna be no more. Is it up for a topic? No, it's gonna be certified. You know, it's gonna be solidified when Yahweh Shai comes, because there ain't gonna be no more room to lie or wiggle out, especially from these nations. You know, and those small hats are cooked anyway. You know, and they're gonna pay greatly for taking our heritage, man. You know, placing upon themselves, you know, the name of Israel when they're really not. You know, and also placing upon the Lord's land. The scripture mentioned that these Edomites have appointed the land of the Lord into their possession. You know, so they're gonna pay for that, man. You know, and the real Israelites, you know, which is us, Negroes, at the end of the day, Americans, Lord willing, we're part of the Lord's elect, you know, are going to be called the sons of the living power, man. You know, that's what's coming. That's what's coming. You know, so yeah, all praises to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahweh Shai, Bashem, Rakakodash, double honors to my apostles and elders, a great millstone. Shalom to my brothers and sisters, listen and learn.